One of the things...
Quick comment on, because I missed it when you guys were mentioning this book. If you guys watch my debate on the resurrection with John Loftus, where even atheists were saying I schooled him, this was the main resource I used for my study on this. So, good stuff here.
Oh, so we have it being used in action, do we? Well, what do these purely objective arguments look like?
You also may have heard people argue that Jesus' disciples simply hallucinated the resurrection appearances. But a hallucination, by definition, is something that occurs in the mind of the person experiencing it. If my friend Paul here takes a bunch of acid and a leprechaun appears to him, the rest of us aren't going to ask for his pot of gold because we're not going to see him. It's only in Paul's mind. The leprechaun doesn't exist outside of his mind. Liars make poor martyrs. Some human beings are willing to die for what they believe in. I've never met anyone who's willing to die for something he made up. The disciples saw the sort of thing that would convince individuals and groups, friends and foes, that they had all seen a man who had been dead, alive again, standing in front of them, telling them why he had to die and rise again. Unfortunately for our atheist friends, the only sort of thing that can do that is Jesus actually appearing to them, which means that Jesus rose from the dead. So
it's pretty much the same bad historiography and bad arguments that's found in every supposed historical look at the case for the resurrection. Figures. Hallucinations are far more likely than a Jewish man rising from the dead and only appearing to a select number of people that have already had contact with this idea of a Messiah, as well as knowing what other people looked like in general. In the clip, Wood acts like these hallucinations can't have some kind of general theme to them, and this is directly contrary to what we see in reality now. We see themes being applied to hallucinations all the time. UFO abductees. They generally relay similar information, and you can even subdivide those particular experiences up into different versions of the same experience. Also, when you hear about people having an experience of an angel or these near-death experiences that are most likely hallucinations, those also take on similar general themes. This is what religion does to a historian when they start investigating their own faith. It causes them to have ad hoc statements that are not supported by the evidence.
One thing I really did enjoy about Mike's book, probably my favorite part about the book, is his section on the way history is done. It's called like historical epistemology. If you're familiar with that term, it's just kind of how we come to know things. And in that book, he has like a pretty good section on the different methodologies and stuff that historians take and why it's important to have these criteria so that way we can look past our biases as well. And so I think that's one thing that a lot of people aren't really familiar with. And because of that, they may not understand like the quality of the evidence, or they don't know how to kind of organize the evidence when it comes to historical evidence and the resurrection. So
it's not that we don't know how to organize the evidence. The criteria that you present here are meant to circumvent this bias that skeptical people have when they start taking a look at your faith. The criteria actually reinforce the bias that you have. Like I said before, this criteria that they use is only ever used in New Testament studies to prove that Jesus resurrected and to prove that he existed. And the only thing they're looking to circumvent is your ability to critically take a look at the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Next is a really good example of their criteria putting on these Christ-colored glasses for you.
Let's first start about, what do you think about miracles? Can history show miracles or prove miracles? What is your kind of position on that, and what do you think?
Yeah, I do think they can.
Okay, and there we go. That's it. So,
yeah, I do think historians can investigate, and in principle, they could prove miracle claims. And when I say prove, I'm using prove in a relative sense. I mean, none of us can get into a time machine, return to the past, and verify our conclusions. So when I say prove, I'm talking about reasonable certainty, of course.
Mike Licona hides behind the fact that you can't 100% prove that a miracle happened in history, let alone anything else in history. He recontextualizes miracles to make it seem like they're just any other event that has happened in history. This reference class does not actually describe the case of miracles. Miracles would be violations of the natural order of reality, whether a God exists or not. The reference class of other events that follow this natural order of reality does not fit miracles. He has to do this in order for his points to make sense. This is the same kind of tactic that creationists use to make their arguments seem plausible. Creationists have to argue against uniformitarianism in order to make their point, and that's exactly what Mike Licona is doing here.
So does that mean that there is no historical evidence that, because here's the thing is, like, you'll see a lot of atheists who will say, like, oh, it's in the history. They kind of throw out history in whole, well, we weren't there 2,000 years ago. There was a comment earlier that said that, well, how am I supposed to believe something that happened 2,000 years ago?
Well, can't you apply that to Caesar's crossing the Rubicon?
Yeah.
In 49 BC, or his assassination at the Ides of March, 44 BC.
Yeah.
Of course, you can prove some things of the past with reasonable certainty. You can't with 100% certainty, because there's all kinds of challenges to learning about the past. But
here, Licona is using the vagueness of history to hide his historical evidence for his faith. History can be pretty vague, and the historical evidence for some events in history is not as abundant as we would like. That is the only place where Licona's evidence has any validity. Mike goes on to basically describe historiography and how we analyze sources. Like, who records an event, when did they record it, who were their sources, and if they are independent or not. Then he says this.
You look at sources, and then you look at what can we mine from those sources, come up with what we call facts that we can believe with reasonable certainty. And then you formulate hypotheses to say what hypotheses can account for these facts. And then you assess those hypotheses to see which one best accounts for those facts.
All of this that he just said is subjective. At the heart of the historical method, it's very subjective as to what you think explains the facts. To Licona, God existing and Jesus rising from the dead explains all of the facts. And it does explain those facts, but we have yet to prove that God exists and that somebody can rise from the dead in the manner that Jesus did. Occam's razor says that a hypothesis among competing hypotheses that has the least amount of ad hoc assumptions attached to it is most likely the correct one. The two assumptions that Licona and all other apologists have to make in this particular context are ad hoc, unfounded assumptions.